I've prepared some questions before. I sent emails to you. But I would like to, instead of starting off with the first opening question that I was going to start off with, I was extremely interested by your presentations and the statement where you talked about bringing research to realization to implementation, which is what we've been talking about earlier today also. Johan, you said something. You said, we don't speak the same language. So please elaborate on that.
I'll give you one example, actually. As I'm working also very close with Kista City, and the expression deep tech comes in very often. Deep tech is what we work with. The cloud initiative is talking about creative tech. It's the same thing, really, but it's from where the technology is being created. We want to make it, put some color and some liveliness to it. Let's call it like this: a semiconductor is being parts. Creating a semiconductor is being developed here. Let's say so. Does it have a very interesting communicative message to the public on a board on the subway? Maybe not. But what does it create? Does it create automation of something, or I don't know, drone deliveries, or street cleaning capabilities? It creates something which is cool, and this is what we want to express and communicate more. That things are being created here. It's actually giving you this as the end product, and I think that link we need to make stronger. Actually,
thank you. That's. I was thinking about that, and you mentioned this now. I mean, we have people living here in Kista, for example, in this area. We have people working in this area, and it's a large number of people. So, do you? And this is an open question, anyone can jump in. Do you think that digital twin is the way forward to sort of communicate what you're doing, what we are doing, what we're trying to the changes that we're trying to make in Kista, for example?
No.
No. Fábio?
No, I think, so I have 3 points. First of all, I think, how many of you live in Kista? Okay, cool. So it's a good example that digital twin is not part of their language. So I think, and how many of you have moved to a city or have visited Paris because Paris has smart street lights? None of us. We go to a city because it has nice restaurants or bar and people and doing creative things. So if we're focusing on technology to communicate change that we want to see in cities, we lost already. So I think if we want to make changes in Kista, we have to communicate with people living in Kista and creating new urban experiences. It's not through a very detailed description and simulation that we're going to move forward with these changes.
Could I have another view on that? But not really total agree with you, because for example, with in decision making, for example, in the city of Stockholm, we have a lot of different administrations are specialized in different areas, and normally when you get a paper, you need to read, and if it's a picture, it's many times it's just a black and white picture instead of the starting color-rich picture and so on. So it's very easy to misunderstand each other. And I think a tool like digital twins could helping us, as you say, to talking about the same things in that type. But I agree that it's not the technical who is really the interest, it's the result of this. And I think twins will help us to faster came to a result.
So you mean like a visualization tool?
Yes, but it could also be, you need all the data behind, and that's, we can talk about how to handle this and so on, but...
Maybe we can divide it into two different questions. First, realize and understanding the problem, talking to the citizen, and then using it as a tool to build on what you're saying, we're speaking the same language. and to have a same data set, working on the same data set. I think my other Lucas said during the inauguration this morning that working in the same data set makes us work together, and that could be the digital twin can be part of contributing to that.
Thank you. I'll get back to the script now to make you feel comfortable. The first question also an open question where I feel free to jump in. What are the main challenges we face in collecting data in relation to mapping urban challenges? And how do you see that digital twins help us in overcoming these obstacles? So you have sort of addressed that, but yeah, try and develop a bit more around that. Anyone wants to start? Yes, Anton.
Yeah, so I mean, we all know that there's lots of data out there. There's lots of data being collected, and very little of that is used. And in most projects, I mean, I have colleagues working in the AI area, and they say they spend like 80% of the time just cleaning up the data, understanding where the data comes from, where it's wrong, you know, and all that. So a lot of time goes into that. We've been involved in some projects with Norra Djurgårdsstaden, where they're supposed to like tell how much energy the buildings are using after a couple of years after they built it. And I mean, there's a lot of trouble getting the data and understanding. Sometimes they built a grocery store, like a Coop store, in the building. So it's like not longer what's called fastighetsel. It's more like electricity that's used in some kind of business, and then it should be not calculated in. But the information about that is stored on someone's computer screen on a post-it, sort of. So you always need to. I mean, there's a lot of talk about this kind of data IoT platforms and so on. But what was interesting with a digital twin, for example, we had one project with a sawmill, and they had tons of engines, like flipping the logs, sawing the logs, you know, pushing them forward into the system and all that. And when we got all the data, we were spending a whole day just understanding where the data come from. If you have a 3D model and you kind of map it up, you can start seeing where things are wrong as well. Like this engine was not engaged, but it should have been. Yeah, we had the signal wrong, you know, and all that kind of things. So I think what digital twins are is like an interface between the data and our mind. So in that case, they also will help us to improve the quality of the data collected. Then, maybe I'm taking too much time here, but
no, it's fine.
But also, slight returning to the previous question. I mean, I was working in a lot of projects regarding smart grids and how people would change their behaviors depending on the electricity cost. And it was several years ago, and everyone was like, "Yeah, no one will start washing during the night because you just save ören. It's just like nothing. Who would bother with that?" Now they're actually writing in the papers, "Don't wash at night because you can cause a fire." You know. So now the worries is on the other side. But things change over time. So maybe digital twins is still science fiction, and it's going to be that for quite some time, I think. And there might be specific people using it, but most won't. But in a couple of years, it might be that it's kind of the norm to be using digital systems like this. And they might not look like the digital twins today, but I think obviously things will change in the future.
Anyone else want to add? Otherwise, I have a question.
I would say it's a huge challenge, especially for the city of Stockholm, to handle all this data, both inside our organization, because we have some old system, some new system, and all this call with the same data at the same, and so on. And then we have all this with the legacy and how to deal with this. So it's I normally say that I think that. When you talk about digital things and using IoT and so on, you don't calculate to see all the cost on time it take to bring the data to something you can use, and then especially maintains, as you describe very well in that case.
Thank you. And about the user,
I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, when I talk to our data scientists, we have a lot of data, but it takes a lot of time to clean that data and make it useful in some way. And I think another aspect is, I mean, for us as a company, data sharing could be a bit tricky because we're talking about business models and ownership of data, which is not really clear for us. So we need to find different ways of working with academia and also public sector on how to use the data as well. And another aspect is also the GDPR and the regulations around data, which make it difficult. And I think the digital twins could be an important tool there to sort of play around with data and also have a sort of a policy lab.
And to continue there, how do you think that Einride could benefit and contribute to the data collection?
Well, we have a lot of vehicles, collect a lot of data. So I think we could, well, maybe have some sensors on our vehicles. That could be one thing. But also, I think when it comes to benefit from the data, we work with push the electrification and automation of the transport system. And an important aspect in the electrification is sort of to extend the life length of the batteries, then to have access to data on traffic flows and prediction of travel times and so on is also very important. When we talked about autonomous transport, which is also very important for us, we develop our own vehicles, our own pod, an autonomous truck. Then I would say that, I mean, having access to this LiDAR and radar data, this 3D digitalization is also really important and sort of speed up the process of piloting those vehicles.
That's interesting. I'd like to bring in Niel into the conversation as well from Scania.
Hi.
Hi. What contractual governance models are the automotive industry exploring to facilitate these goals of data sharing amongst local actors, and why?
So the reason I sort of brought this up as a possible question is I imagine that this might be the top of a conversation. So everything that everyone has said here is absolutely true. We've been working on some projects internationally. Scania, for those who don't know, is part of the Volkswagen Group, which is almost 700,000 people, so quite big. Within our factories, we developed some software that monitors logistics and things moving around. And we realized that because some of our factories are quite large, as an example, the one in Wolfsburg, the roof space is the same size as the country of Monaco, which is a small country, but it's still quite big. We have a lot of the same problems that cities have. And so one of the first things is standardization of data. So we see that a lot of countries, including many Swedish cities, are using FI-ware. That's a data standardization for APIs with smart cities. That's something that we think is useful. But when it comes to governance models, what we've said in our initial proposal is that cities are the owners and take stewardship of that data. And that's really important because if you look at the engagements we've started in the US with research projects with cities, it means that the city decides who they want to share their data with. It means you don't have to come to me and go through the 10 attorneys standing behind me, which usually takes us about 12 months to make a decision because we're very, very nervous about GDPR and data privacy, as we should be as a large company with a lot of money to lose on the table as well. But the important thing is about making it owned by the cities and stewarded by the cities is that the ethics question is also answered by democracy. So it means if somebody does something immoral or illegal with that, there's an election cycle coming up. And hopefully change will come as a result of that.
Extremely interesting. And that will take me off script again. Sorry about that. But because you mentioned, I was thinking about that. How do you see... I think the ethical perspectives using sensors and data collection is, I mean, they are really important. So I would like to have a few reflections on that. That's one. Also the discussion, who's the end user and who does the analysis of all of this data. I mean, the researchers, of course, do analysis. I understand that. But I mean, at the end of the day, you want to bring the result to the end user. And is that it? Or do you continue working with it? Go ahead.
Could you repeat the first question?
The ethical aspects of working with data collection, and you mentioned GDPR, big data, etc. How do you...
I think Barbara would be the best person to answer, but I have two thoughts.
But now you're here. So
but now I'm here, then she will contact me later. But first, I think we can collect a lot of data. I think sometimes we don't ask why. Do we actually need this data? Sometimes we collect data for the sake of data collection. So I think this is a bad start. And second, I think the ethical aspect of data sometimes is a more transactional value than a normative value. I will give a very simple example. Facebook and Google, both of them, they collect exactly the same data. I hate Facebook because I think that they invade my privacy. I'm giving the same data to Google, but Google tells me how to reach Kista. So it gives me something back in value. So I think if we don't have this transaction value when we're proposing to collect data and what we're giving back to people, I think we might be missing a very important thing. So if we start collecting data in Kista simply because we can, it's a bad start.
Thank
I
you.
can just underline, as a city, as I would say, all democratic city, at least in the world, is not interesting in that who is going on the street. It's just interesting, is it people in the street, and how many, and based on that, we can do design our service in the best way to do this. And we have a lot of example where we, with this type of data, we have been able to make benefit for the citizens, but maybe we have not been so good to communicate the relation between the data we collect and the benefit they get in better service in that case. But the ethic, I think, it's for democratic cities is we really, I mean, agree that the election is also a very good point that you can change if something doing wrong.
Yep. I mean, as an example, perhaps, we can, with access to all the city cameras, we can tell where the parking spaces actually are that fit your vehicle. Also, with electric vehicles, if the charger is available. So there may be a charger that's not being used, but there's another car parked in that space. And so these are solving real problems for people right now. A public safety one that's quite nice is kindergarteners walking in a group, which you see quite a lot of here in Stockholm, along a street and telling car drivers, don't go down that street because there's a group of little children running around.
If I can put a question, I think for Niel and whoever works also in mobility, but for instance, the car industry, you have been collecting data about cars, vehicles, transportation, everything. But arguably, the most important innovation in transportation the last 10 years came from social media. Uber. It's a combination of social media, a geolocation, and that's it. And this changed mobility completely, even though mobility experts have been collecting massive amounts of data. So sometimes innovation does not come from the sheer accumulation of data from one specific domain, right?
It's a very good point. I mean, and I have to be careful I don't get into too much trouble with this answer. But, so we're a company that has a revenue around 300 billion euros a year as a group. So what we do as a company makes money. Why should we change? If you have a continuous profit stream from something.
Until a point that you know that until a point this was exactly the same early 20th century. So they decided to put cars in the streets of Chicago, and the city said, "But why? We have all this fleet of horses and carriages. We're not investing in that." Okay, so don't. And then 20 years later, oh, we don't need your carriage anymore. We have cars. So I think I understand your point, but sometimes the transformation will come from very unexpected places.
The transformation is very difficult, and not everybody will make it. Let's say that. And certainly we're starting to engage more with cities and understand what the needs of those citizens are, and how do we redesign what value we bring to the community. Over a longer period of time. And one of the things, the work that I'm doing at the moment came out of a study internationally to understand what does shared mobility look like for the future of our business, and what would those vehicles look like. And that's a very difficult question to answer. But it came down to this idea of aspirational shared mobility, something that people want to do, which is why we started testing in cities in America where they don't have public transport at the moment, and they have lots of free parking.
And now I'm going to step in to make this into a 7-log instead of a dialogue. And you have to leave. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Johan.
Thank you.
And you have a small gift to pick up over there by Lina. Anton, I'd like to ask you then if you have any comments related to this. Otherwise, I would like to ask you how can we create a local then powerful
I do
hub?
have some comments to this.
Good. So take the comments and then I'll have the question for
No,
you.
I
Go
mean,
ahead.
it depends
Yes.
on, I mean, there's several angles you can take on this. I mean, one thing is just like, I mean, I totally agree with you that it feels really stupid to think that we can engage local people here in Kista with some kind of fancy digital Christmas tree, you know, thing. But also it's like, if you think in a larger perspective, it's like our cognitive abilities, you know, people say that it's not only in our brains, it's also in our bodies and the tools we use, you know. And also it's like when written language came along, you know, it expanded our brains so we could read stuff that we had never experienced before, or we could learn things from other, you know, in a whole new way, sort of. And today we're not asking like who is the end user of written text, you know. It's kind of like all over. So and the same with data, you know, like data is expanding our minds as well. I mean, I know if my kids comes home, I have a beep on my phone, you know, so I know that they're home. So I practically my nervous system extends to my home nowadays. And through Twitter, we actually communicate. Our like neurons doesn't just send signals between each other. They also sometimes pop over to someone else, you know, which is not in the room or somewhere else, you know. So I think this kind of is a development. So I mean, I really hate the word smart, you know, but smart is like doing the best with the abilities you have. I think the definition is, you know, and knowing what the best is, you need those kind of data. And I think there's a democratic issue, like the Google and the big ones. They have the manpower to actually do something. Today, rarely anyone can do something by themselves. If you there was a guy, artist who's going to build his own toaster, you know, from the scratch. So he made and went and got ore, you know, and started beating up the ore and heating it to make it. Was the crappiest toaster you could ever imagine that it turned out to be. So I mean, we can't do things individually today, but those big companies, they can do stuff and they can actually get something out of the data. But I think there's a democratic issue there, and I think we could do something there at least. I mean, I was playing around with a new tool, just as an example, called Stream Sheets. I don't know if you tried it, but it's basically Excel, but you can get a sensor in one of the cells which real-time updates, you know. So you can do your Excel formula, and then you can make a square or something, and then you can have the angle of the square changing depending on the sensor value, and all of a sudden you have made, you know, like a thing, you know, with IoT data. And the thing we were producing, we were thinking like, yeah, this is a more fancy version of PowerPoint, basically. So I mean, if you can get real-time data into PowerPoint or statistical data sorted in nicely in some way, I mean, there will always be different people. Some people hate Excel, some people know how to do PowerPoint, some people don't even know how to do that. But I mean, in some way, and some people are spectators. I mean, someone creates a PowerPoint and they just watch it, and sometimes they are convinced or sometimes they're not, you know. So maybe that's like the view of the end user that I have. I'm not sure if that was clear, but yeah.
Thank you. And I'm holding the other question I had for you because I was thinking, getting back to the end user. Okay, so say we have a digital twin of Kista, and I understood you were talking about the different layers that you have in twin. Okay, so then what? What do we do with a digital twin?
Well, I think, for example, in the city of Stockholm, we could have, I think, and you will correct me, my college, could have a more qualified and faster discussion about decision making for this area, because we are in the city split up and many organizations in different silos, and could we use this to come together and see, yes, we see the same view, and then starting to discuss how to handle the challenge. I think it would be, you know, better quality decision in that case.
So it's a tool for implementation.
One of the
to discussion, say, in that case.
One of the things we saw in the US and the feedback we had was we started off what we were doing as a sort of transport research thing, but the mayor asked us to speak to the police department, fire department, civil engineering, and parks and recreation and stuff. And people started telling us all their problems. And one group from environment was like, well, when we get heavy rainfall, the streets get flooded to a certain level. Could you measure that level of water? And we said, yeah, but why? And they said, well, because if we know that, then we can over time see that maybe some of the drains are clogged, and we can quickly clear those drains that are clogged. And the next time we get heavy rains, we won't get so much insurance damage. And so it's solving problems. Or if we're monitoring the road usage and how traffic is going around a roundabout, and we put some traffic cones in from civil engineering, we can try out a new idea pretty quickly, working together with the police department on traffic safety, and make decisions quicker, like you're saying.
But then this also means that the challenges have to be very correctly formulated or phrased in order to be able to put the right questions.
So it's about, it's a technology that enables people to come up with solutions. But in order to do that, you need to have an open framework that allows universities and startups from all around the world to compete on this level. And so that's why we think this is valuable to do. On the aspect of, let's say, ethics, just to add that point, one of the US politicians told us the reason we're engaging with you as a car company who is arguably not very good at software, they said it's because you're not, one of the West Coast IT companies that is making their money out of commoditizing, commercializing data. And they gave us a nice phrase, which was, I can't vote for the next CEO of Facebook. And I think that's important to remember in terms of ethics, where this data should be kept.
And getting back to what you were saying about, collaborating with different departments, and Lucas, how do you see that Kista Science City can sort of pitch in here and maybe aid or assist or work with the researchers to create new collaborations so that we can actually create the necessary tools that we need?
Very, very good question. And as we talked about during the inauguration, the value of death, and I believe that our organization want to help projects and pilots to pass this value of death, if you make the analogy, and making the research applied in a way so you can scale it up in a societal level. And we work with academia, we work with large companies, small companies, and we work with the municipality. And all these different organizations are different animals. They proceed in different speed, in different ways. And I believe it's a maturity journey for all of these organizations to meet in the middle. And sometimes the smaller companies have to walk further to meet, but still the municipality and the academia must meet on the other way around. And we are trying to grasp these organizations and merge them together, resulting in implementable solutions. And first of all, look at the actual need, so we would solve the right problems as well.